died and a further 200 were injured on the stairway out of the grounds as they left an Old Firm game. It's thought someone fell or collapsed, causing others to trip. As our social affairs correspondent, Niall Alderson reports, the anniversary is bringing back particularly painful memories for one small Fife town.
I said, I'll wave to you from the window, and they all went along the street, the 5 of them, and swung their scarves and sang Rangers songs, and that's the last I saw of him.
It was from this street that 5 teenage schoolboys left for Ibrox on Saturday and died later that day on the steps of the exit to Section 13. Parkview in Markinch hasn't changed much in the past 40 years, but despite the passage of time, the memories of that terrible day in January 1971 remain raw. Peter Easton was one of 5 boys from this small scheme in Fife, killed on Stair 13 at the end of the Old Firm game.
My husband didn't want him to go at all, but Peter was a very clever boy, and he had been doing so well at school, and he pleaded with me. He was an ardent fan of Rangers, and he pleaded with me, so I couldn't deny him, and I persuaded my husband to let him go. And I remember we stood in the kitchen, and Peter said to me, "Thanks, Mum." And it was my fault that he was killed.
The boys died shortly after Colin Steele had equalised for Rangers in the 89th minute of the game. As the crowd left the stadium, someone tripped or collapsed on the crowded Stairway 13. The press of supporters was immense and buckled the cast-iron barriers and handrails. 66 people died and more than 200 were injured. In the aftermath, the town of Markinch came to a standstill as the funeral cortege of the 5 teenagers passed on its way to the cemetery. One of the mourners was Shane Fenton, their pal. He'd been to the game as well, but as a Celtic fan went to a different part of the ground. Earlier this year, Shane helped organise the refurbishment of the memorial in Markinch to the dead boys. It was paid for by donations from Rangers fans worldwide.
We were actually up at the station waiting on the last trains and the last buses coming into Markinch and hope that they would come off them. But it was actually the next day when the news filtered through that the boys had tragically died.
After all of the funerals, Rangers resumed their season, but 40 years on, Peter Easton's mum still grieves.
You never get over the loss of your child. That is the worst thing that can happen to a parent, to lose a child. And while, of course, I don't sit and cry now all the time, but there isn't a day that I don't think of him.
Rangers are holding a remembrance ceremony at Ibrox Park on January the 3rd, the day after they meet Celtic again in the league. Niall Alderson reporting Scotland.
And the BBC will be providing full coverage of that service from Ibrox on Radio Scotland, 810 medium wave, as well as on the BBC News channel from 11 o'clock on Monday the 3rd of January. And next week on Reporting Scotland, we'll hear from the Rangers captain that day, John Gregg, as well as a survivor of the terrible events of Stairway 13. Other news now. Researchers